Thank you, Mike and Representative Stevens, for the wonderful opening to the event. I'm now pleased to move on to the next session of our AI Gov event, a panel about federal AI collaboration and the importance of fostering partnerships and cooperation to develop robust and responsible AI. I'm Melissa Harris, a staff writer and researcher at GovernmentCIO Media and Research, and I'll be moderating this wonderful panel today. Here to join me is Taka Ariga, Government Accountability Office Chief Data Scientist and Innovation Lab Director, Bryan Lane, GSA IT Modernization Centers of Excellence AI Lead, and Landon Van Dyke, State Department Office of Management, Strategy and Solutions Chief Technology Officer. Thank you all for joining me today. So just off the bat, I wanted to ask you guys, what are you doing in the AI space? What keeps you busy? And what are you up to at your organizations in the AI space? Taka, do you want to lead us off there?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Melissa. And such a great pleasure to be with the GovernmentCIO audience this morning. As Chairwoman Stevens mentioned, AI is such an important and transformative topic. It's very timely as we continue to modernize agencies. There will be more and more proliferation of the data. There's a lot of federal data strategy progress being made. So at GAO, we have essentially doubled down on how AI can, help shape the way that federal agencies deliver their services, deliver their mission. But GAO does play a unique duality role. As much as we would like to experiment on AI capability, we also know that we need to wear that oversight hat. So there's a lot of sort of experimentation happening through the innovation lab in terms of developing natural language processing capability. But at the same time, we have issued a number of reports around AI's application in drug discovery, for example, in healthcare. We have done a number of spotlights, most recently on deepfake and forensic algorithm. And in late June timeframe, we will look to publish our first of its kind AI oversight framework. And it really is meant as a foundational document for an oversight agency such as GAO to start asking questions around performance, around the societal impact that we are all very aware of, and do so in a sort of across the life cycle of AI development, so that we can collectively build that trust across the implementations that are happening across the landscape.
Fantastic. Bryan, do you want to take us off? What are you doing in the AI space?
Yeah, thanks so much, Melissa. And again, it's truly a pleasure to be here. So I'm a bit of an odd duck because I have two hats, right? So my first hat is as the co-founder of the AI Center of Excellence at GSA. And I have one role in that particular area. And then my second hat is at the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and I've played a number of roles inside that organization as well. So let's first start with kind of the Center of Excellence hat, right? So GSA established the Centers of Excellence with the intent on helping agency-wide IT modernization across a broad range of areas: contact center, customer experience, data and analytics, cloud, et cetera. The AI Center of Excellence is the most recent one that came out as a result of the AI Summit from about 1.5 years ago. And so really we're looking to help agencies adopt AI inside their organization. And that can take a number of different forms depending on what the agency's mission is. So part of the Center of Excellence model is to capture these best practices and share them with other agencies. And so through that, we do have an AI capability maturity model that we work together across our different functional areas to really ask the question, if we were an organization, how would we benchmark where we are in AI, and then how could we roadmap and plan where we want to go. When I put my DoD hat on, the JAIC is in a similar situation. They are essentially the AI hub for the department, and they are focused on mission initiative areas that span everything from cybersecurity to healthcare and everything in between. So an extremely broad mission space in that role. I've been able to help them stand up data management and governance processes for the Joint Common Foundation. We've explored some interesting acquisition pathways, both traditional and non-traditional acquisition for AI, which comes with it with a whole host of AI-specific things like IP and data rights and ethics and privacy and transparency and things like that. And most recently now, I'm supporting them with the Business Process Transformation Mission Initiative, which is focused on investment in AI capabilities for back office business processes to help transform the department into a digital, modern, data-driven organization.
Fantastic. Sounds like you have a lot on your plate. And Landon, lastly, do you want to let us know, what are you doing in the AI space?
Thanks, Melissa. And again, it's wonderful to be here and to be here with your audience as well. For the State Department, we're a crossroads between domestic and overseas and international engagement. So, for AI, for us, we are using AI, or we're working on bringing it in to improve our operations, looking at natural language processing to, sift through the thousands of diplomatic cables from diplomats around the world that come in on a weekly basis, and try to do better knowledge management of the information that's coming in. We're obviously trying to improve things like our visas and passport facilities and try to speed up that process. So we're using, again, natural language processing to help us review and do some auditing of visa applications and stuff. We're also looking over at machine learning for our IoT sensors that we have around the world, because most people don't realize the U.S. government, the State Department, we have over 274, consulates and embassies around the world. So we're in 274 cities, lots of buildings out there. We're tracking things from air quality to vehicle telematics to how our equipment's performing in those buildings so that they can stay up and alive. So we're working on those type of areas internally. Externally, we're working on engagement with citizen science and helping come up with ways to standardize citizen science data so that it can be incorporated in the larger science community and improve studies, things like climate change and water pollution and plastic pollution.
Awesome. So it sounds like, all of you are working in collaboration, not just within your agency, across agencies, but also with the public, in your case, Landon. So I just want to go into that a little bit more and ask each of you what collaboration looks like at your agencies. Who are you working with internally to your organizations? Like perhaps it's data scientists or ethics experts, and maybe externally too. Landon, let's go back to you and go in reverse order this time.
Sorry, I was just being interrupted here. 1 second.
Okay.
So what does collaboration look like for us? A lot of it is, it's about preparation for AI. So we're doing a lot of things like ethics implementation, and we're part of the interagency group that's focused on trying to implement some of the guiding principles for ethics and AI. We're looking at, how do we make things auditable? How do we make it transparent? Making sure that our AI implementations are purpose-driven, obviously respectful for citizens and the law. But we're also doing a lot of preparation just on the logistics, the infrastructure, cybersecurity, data storage strategies, sharing agreements between interagencies, just standardization of data sets and cataloging all of that. So, we're working with obviously the OSTP and, obviously OMB and the NSC. But we're also working with HHS because of COVID. We've been working on data strategies for sharing these type of important data sets for not just for DC, but for around the world, for our agencies around the world that are at the embassies. So we're all over the place. If you're at an embassy, you're definitely partner with us. For things like citizen science, we're working with the Wilson Center and with NOAA and with NASA. EPA is helping us with air quality, and obviously things like building equipment, we work with DOE.
Fantastic. Bryan, you mentioned before that you're doing a lot of collaborative work across your work at the Centers of Excellence at GSA, and also your work at the Jake is pretty, intersectional too. Let's move to you. What does collaboration look like in your daily work?
Yeah, great question. And I'll say, last year when we stood up the AI Center of Excellence, kind of the theme of the year was AI is achievable in government. And then, now that we're a year or plus into it, I'm saying AI is a team sport and you don't have to go on this journey alone. And so partnerships and collaboration are very important in both of the hats that I wear. Of course, the GSA Centers of Excellence, they are built upon the idea of partnering with agencies. And our first significant partnership was with USDA. They were our lighthouse agency, and it was a very large, top-down IT modernization effort that included, many partners along the way. Our partnership with the Jake also has been key. We do have a government-wide focus, and a government-wide focus that is also tailored specifically to individual agency needs. So if we look at government-wide collaboration, we have the RPA community of practice, the federal RPA community of practice that's run out of GSA. That is one of the most highly engaging communities of practice I've ever been a member of, and they do fantastic work, especially in terms of sharing information about use cases and best practices and landmines to avoid along the way, and they truly are building a strong community of practitioners. And then we also have the federal AI community of practice, which is strives to do the same thing except for AI instead of robotic process automation. So we cast a pretty wide net in terms of external collaboration, government-wide. Internally, we try and work across GSA as an organization. Innovation is one of our core values, and so oftentimes we will find ways to partner with other organizations within GSA, like Office of Government-Wide Policy or other parts of the Technology and Transformation Services, and things like that. The Jake, and especially with Director Lieutenant General Groen at the helm, one of our #1 priorities right now is partnership in the DoD, and specifically cultivating partnerships to provide enabling capabilities and services to help the armed services in their AI adoption. And so those partnerships can take the form of a number of different things, but specifically it's collaboration around delivering AI capabilities. So that could be providing software or analytic tools, helping with data, supporting test and evaluation activities, and even in some cases prototype development, delivery, or scaling infrastructure. So really we cover the full gambit, government-wide, civilian, and military alike in terms of collaboration and partnerships.
Awesome. And Taka, let's turn to you. What does collaboration look like for you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Melissa. And much like what Bryan articulated, GAO also has a pan-governmental purview. Statutorily, GAO does look like wide-ranging government policy, program, and operations. So when we talk about developing AI, we don't specifically to narrow our focus on any given domain. And so we really start the process by looking at what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and as opposed to walk around the hallway with the latest and greatest algorithm to say we have a hammer, we're looking for nails. So I think that's a very important focus. There are certain problems that are amenable to certain type of mathematical techniques, and so not all AIs are created equal. And then secondarily, we're also focusing on the availability and the quality of that data, because that is the foundation of how GAO can do our credible and sort of a quality output. And so data governance is something that we are in parallel tackling in terms of making sure that there is an availability of the data, there's an access to that data, there's lineage and provenance around those data, and how can we evaluate metadata in a way that makes them more AI development friendly. And once we get to the mathematics and the statistics and model development aspects of AI, this is where we have to be really sort of deliberate and purposeful in terms of how we choose them. At GAO, we don't necessarily believe in click and drag in terms of AI development. So there are specific problems that are, for example, jargon heavy, that, for example, are very esoteric or very technical, in where applying a commercially available algorithm may not necessarily make sense, because those algorithms may be trained on commercial data sets as opposed to, let's say, pharmaceutical vocabularies. So there are a number of instances where we identify our own internally developed, for example, natural language processing models or topic modeling algorithm actually perform better than options that we have access to in the commercial space. And so this is an example of how we're really taking that problem-centered approach in how we develop and apply those algorithms and driving those machine learning capabilities. And speaking of partnership, while the Innovation Lab is focused on developing prototypes, we don't want those capabilities just end at the prototype stage. So we are proactively partnering with our IT organization to think about orchestration, about scalability, about productionalizing those AI capabilities so that they can be made broadly accessible across GAO, but I think more importantly, across the oversight community. As a matter of fact, I'm actually partnering with Bryan's colleague at GSA. They're helping us really scale our cloud service capability to exactly doing that, to productionalize a lot of our AI capability. And I think I would be remiss not to add the last piece of it here is how do we continually monitor the performance of AI solution so that the data doesn't drift, so that we can reinforce the learning and whatnot. I said the last thing, but one more thing. A lot of this is we can't sort of algorithmically solve our way out of the problem unless we have a workforce that is data literate, that has the capability of consuming output from AI models. So that's another area that GAO is also tackling. So beyond just the mathematics and the algorithmic aspects of it, there's data governance, there's a IT orchestration piece of it, there's a data literacy piece of it. I think all of them have to go hand in hand for AI implementations to be successful.
So Taka, I want to continue chatting with you there about what you're doing. And, you were talking about the oversight work that GAO does. And so, you have to balance looking to use and create prototypes of and also audit AI at the same time. So what challenges do you face in that balance? And how do you look for trustworthy, verifiable AI, both in your own lab and with the AI GAO audits?
Yeah, and that's the $6 billion question, right? And if the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act is any indication, mandate for AI capability will continue to proliferate. And we see that not only at the federal level, but also at the state, and as well as working with our international partners. I think the important aspects of it is you need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? I think we can simultaneously explore machine learning and AI capability, but that also help us to understand the kind of questions that we will need to ask relative to audits of those implementation. So for example, the analogy that I always draw is if you were going to evaluate an AI system, it's very much like going to a car dealership. If you were looking to purchase a car, you wouldn't just read the user manual and make that purchase decision. You will actually test drive the car. And so for us to test drive an AI algorithm, we need to specifically know what are the kind of governance structure that we should evaluate. What are the kind of data sets that we should evaluate? What are the kind of technical artifacts that we should collect and evaluate? And is there the tail end of it in terms of requirements and practices around monitoring, around adversarial attack, and sort of a forward-looking posture? So I think our ability to prototype those solutions is actually very informative to thinking about how GAO can really be thoughtful around the oversight posture that we should be taking. So, I think this sort of experimentation capability is symbiotic with our ability to conduct oversight. And then we continue to play that role in terms of not only working with NIST, but other agencies to think through how do we get those high-level AI principle down to the implementation level and down to the domain level, as Chairwoman Stephen articulated. Consideration for self-driving car is very different than, let's say, an AI solution for HR screening or for robotic process automation. So it shouldn't be one size fits all. But I think there are a set of commonality across general life cycle of AI. Our goal is to take that first step to address that general life cycle commonality. And then as we iterate forward, be able to take domain-specific, application-specific approach to AI oversight.
Awesome. Landon, I want to go back to you. You were talking about some of the international collaborations that you have. For example, you work with the Wilson Center and the United Nations in data sharing and such. Can you explain this partnership and the kind of work and best practices you've developed here? As well as, with the citizen science that you've been doing, that's another layer into how you're fostering collaboration into your work. How are you folding the different best practices and work you're doing into this space to tackle some mission areas?
Thanks, Melissa. Great question. Essentially, for us, we are taking a lot of the lessons learned at the federal level of applying AI into our internal activities, along with sharing data with other agencies and applying that to the citizen science activity that we're doing with the Wilson Center and the United Nations. In that scenario, you have lots of different very proactive environmentalists out there collecting lots of data on plastic and air quality and water quality. And they believe that this is very useful for the science community. Unfortunately, the science community, there's a little bit of a disconnect because in many cases, they don't have the right provenance or metadata on the data set that the science community or the citizen science community is trying to give. And so what we're doing is we're going in and we're working with lots of different environmental groups that are collecting this information, including NOAA and NASA, and seeing what we can do to improve the data sets and make them more usable to the science community, and adding the extra metadata, adding the extra or origin story of where this data came from, and coming up with different ways where we can cross-validate this information. Once that information is brought into the science community with all this information, it makes it more AI ready. It makes it more interoperable and easier to digest, and it's easier for them to align this type of data with other data sets that they might already have from satellites or from other land-based or satellite-based sources. So for us, it really is working with people on the ground in different countries that have different scenarios, everything from, they don't have internet on a daily basis 24/7, and how do we help them consolidate data sets that may be sitting around for months on end without a timestamp on it? How do we find the origin for that type of information and still enable it so that you can bring it back into a lot of the labs and use it for machine learning to recognize the difference between air quality, for instance. We're having people take photos of the sky, and we're referencing when they took the photo of the sky with what we understand the air quality to be in that area from either land-based or satellite-based sensors. And by doing that, we're helping the science community come up with ways to recognize a cheaper way to recognize what's the air quality through photos, rather than these $100,000 sensors that we have around the world. So for us, it's a lot of collaboration with just local, international partners, and understanding that their environment is way different than what our environment would be here in the United States, and trying to come up with solutions for them.
Certainly. And Bryan, you were mentioning how you have this dual hat, working not only at GSA, but also the Jake. Can you explain that relationship between the COE and the Jake, and how partnerships with the Jake are helping DoD customers out?
Absolutely. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about, honestly. So I'll try not to be too long-winded. So first, the nature of the partnership between COE and the Jake is mutually beneficial, right? We're learning from each other. The AI Center of Excellence has a mandate to operate across federal agencies regardless of what mission space they're in. And we've had enough time on the ground in other organizations helping with general capacity building and IT modernization. So we have shared resources and best practices on organizational change and helping customers move to the cloud and data and analytics before the AI Center was stood up. So that's kind of the institutional knowledge that we bring to our partnership with the Jake. And then the Jake, of course, has its unique mission space of protecting and promoting American national interests. And, we definitely, like I mentioned before, they cover those mission areas that include cybersecurity and healthcare, everything in between. And so they understand that, and I'm so glad that Landon and Taka both mentioned this. This is a mission space that requires deep interaction with the users, deep understanding of the domain area, and a lot of engineering and feature development in order to deliver AI. So that's kind of our give and take with between the centers of excellence and the Jake, right? The COE have provided some expertise. GSA's bread and butter is acquisition, and we've certainly supported the Jake in a number of different ways on the acquisition front. And then shared expertise from technical experts in data, cloud, and AI across the board. So this is a mutual learning together kind of relationship. With the Jake and their mission partners, and I'll give an example of this shortly, but the idea initially was for the Jake to be an accelerator. There's kind of three core tenets of the Jake's mission. The first one is product accelerator. The second is enabler and scaler, and so this is through things like infrastructure and resources. And then the third, which I think is really starting to take shape, is the coordination. So the Jake is the department-wide coordinator for AI. And what that looks like is as we start to partner with agencies, we're picking up things like general baselines of AI maturity or organizational maturity to adopt AI. And, what are the gaps in skill sets, or what are the things where if you could just give a little nitro boost to an agency or a armed service, they could kind of accelerate on their own AI journey just with a little bit of help. And so the example that I'll give there is the Jake through the business process transformation mission partnered with Undersecretary of Defense for Comptroller and the Navy. And the task was pretty straightforward. The Navy has, they have these personnel transaction centers all over the world. When someone goes in to update their personal data in an HR record, that kicks off a bunch of processes on the back end that traditionally are done manually. A few innovators within the organization said, "Hey, I think this workflow is a target that's ripe for automation, and then some potentially machine learning and AI in the future," right? So initially, I was identified as a process to automate. And so what we did is the Jake provided access to software and capabilities and expertise for the solution design. The comptroller provided an ATO platform and infrastructure to actually do robotic process automation. And the Navy came to us with a use case and people within the organization that were committed to solving it. And, for very what I would consider to be low level of effort and investment. They have a working prototype that has now been transitioned to production environment. It is deployed in one location. The initial scaling plan is to go to 2 more in the near term, with the potential of expanding to 13 locations across the globe, reducing workload for this specific task by 50%. And this was not a multi-billion-dollar, big budget line item. This was an innovation project that the barrier to entry was so low and the impact is so high. It's a no-brainer to scale it.
Fantastic. So we've talked a lot about the collaboration happening between agencies, and even within and with the international space as well. But part of federal AI collaboration is with the partnership in industry. So I wanted to ask you guys, what are your pain points in your AI development, or what are you trying to do with AI that industry partners can help you with? Bryan, I'm going to turn it back to you. You can start us off. What are your pain points?
Oof, pain points. Okay, so I think that there's a couple things, right? For us, especially, I'm going to put on my business process transformation hat here, right? Our pain points are almost completely like structural within an organization and a culture, right? And so oftentimes these are areas that have been underinvested in from a technology point of view. And, when we partner with industry, sometimes even the right capabilities don't stick because they get rejected by the culture and rejected by the organization. So internally, I think definitely our biggest pain point is getting things to stick and changing the organizational culture. From an industry partnership point of view, I would say, assume we do the procurement, we have the capabilities and we're ready to go. Oftentimes what can slow things down, especially when we talk about automation and deploying new software and things like that, is the ATO process. And I don't mean to say that just to, because that always seems to be the target, but it really is. And at the end of the day, it's about managing risk and enabling organizations and industry partners to do things to help benefit the mission and to deliver better service to the American public. And, as long as we keep sight of that, these are obstacles and pain points that can be overcome. Honestly, I am not going to talk about pain points without giving at least one good thing. So I will say that there's been a tremendous amount of work in terms of both exploring traditional and non-traditional ways to do acquisition to get the right vendors in. Oftentimes, having the right capabilities and the right vendors at the right time is a challenge. And I've seen the federal acquisition workforce really rise to that challenge and figure out, how do we get the timing and the capabilities and the industry partners all in sync. And I think we've done a tremendous amount of work there in terms of both traditional and non-traditional acquisition.
Fantastic. Taka, let's go back to you. What are your pain points and how can industry help you out?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Bryan said. The AI graveyard is littered with examples of ATOs and procurement challenges. Best of intention often sort of hits a very jarring breaking point when folks think that FedRAMP equates to an ATO, for example. I think we all have experienced certain amount of pain points relative to how do we buy AI-related product, infrastructure, and services. Those are usually typically measured in months and years, not days and weeks in terms of the speed that we need them to go to. So I think those are a pretty common challenge. But for GAO specifically, one of the key interaction area that we have with our infrastructure provider, service provider, is to make sure that they understand GAO specific requirements around appropriateness of the models and algorithm that we use. Because we do oversight report, many of the work that we do have to be replicable and have to have a certain amount of transparency. So even if an AI product is the greatest thing since sliced bread, if it's cloaked around black box and proprietary and IP rights and whatnot, and we're not able to peel under the hood, more likely than not, it would not be appropriate for us to apply that in a mission delivery setting. It won't pass our quality control. It certainly won't pass many of other milestones that we need to be able to sustain our quality and credibility and be able to defend our work. So I think those are the kind of conversations that we routinely have with service vendor. I think it's very similar to some of the buy versus develop, kind of conversations that we do. So from a prototyping perspective, we're always open to evaluate new capabilities, but we're very real when it comes to having those conversations around appropriateness of those capabilities. Sometimes that leads to good news, sometimes that leads to a bad news, but I think that is the point of the conversation. By being candid, that helps not only the federal government, but also the service and product providers to be able to be more targeted with individual mission needs, individual agency needs. So it's not just, one AI that rules them all kind of conversation.
All right, and Landon, we're coming up at time, so take us away. What's
right.
main points?
Thank you. I'll just reinforce Bryan and Taka's comments. It very much for the vendors when they come in, they come in with all the greatest intentions, but many times the solutions that they're providing are holistic, and to safeguard the government, safeguard American citizens. Our architecture and how data is stored, shared, and evaluated and used doesn't always equate to that holistic AI platform that most people want to bring in. We need to have more targeted capabilities. That said, one of the other pain points though is it's so democratized. It's so easy now for many different bureaus and offices. And remember, we're in 274 cities, so we have IT specialists at all of our embassies, and they look at these things and they say, we could just use a small piece of this, and we will do a procurement of this. And for us, it's a challenge to just track all of these procurements and ensure that they are aligned with our architecture, our full cybersecurity State Department architecture around the world. And so in one sense, it's great that you have this universal platform that can do pretty much data storage and ETLing and metadata and cataloging and analysis, but at the same time, it doesn't always fit with the larger architecture that the department has. And so for us, it's a balance between helping people continue the mission and meet the mission, and at the same time ensuring that we have the proper ethical and cybersecurity safeguards in place, and we're aware of what's going on holistically around the world. And those are challenges that we have when we're working with vendors. And of course, I would be remiss to say that, it's also a little bit of a challenge for budget. When we're working with vendors and we know we want to be able to plan 5 years out, it's sometimes challenging to say, okay, we can prototype something, but we're not sure if we'll have the budget next year to actually operationalize something. So that it's always a fun balance in government to try to work with vendors that understand the nature of the federal government and how money is dispersed through large batches and then small batches and large batches. And sometimes it's not as predictable as we would like.
Yeah, we all aspire to have Jake's budget at some point.
There you go.
One day. Well, we're at time. I want to thank the three of you for joining me today for this wonderful panel. I'll now pass the baton to my colleague, David Chandler, to lead our next panel, which will be about improving research and diagnostics with data analytics.